When it comes to the air war over Europe in World War II, the image that often comes to mind for many is the dense formation of B-17 flying fortresses, the famous American flying fortresses. They swept through the skies, their silver skins glittering in the sun, flying in neat ranks like massive flocks of iron birds. The roar of their 4 Pratt & Whitney engines sounded like pounding drums, a warning sound that destruction was coming for Nazi factories, depots, and railways. From the moment the B-17 was introduced, it carried a message. This was not just a bomber, but a symbol of technological power and faith in America's industrial war doctrine. The Americans called it the Flying Fortress for good reason. The airframe was crowded with 12.7mm Browning machine guns facing almost every direction, dorsal turrets, ventral turrets, tail guns, waist guns, and even a gun position above the cockpit. The idea was simple. Any enemy who dared to close in would be met by overlapping fields of fire from multiple directions, turning an attack into a desperate gamble. That belief was widely promoted. American air crews believed the B-17 could defend itself even when flying deep into German territory. In the press and wartime documentaries, the line was often repeated. A squadron of B-17s is an impregnable fortress in the air. At times, U.S. military thinking even held that escort fighters weren't necessary. The flying fortresses could fend for themselves and complete their missions. That confidence was so strong that many of the initial daylight bombing raids on Germany were flown without fighter escort. War, however, is a harsh test. The truth gradually emerged through each raid and every clash with the Luftwaffe, Hitler's battle-hardened air force. Though the B-17 was strong and resilient, it was not perfect. And within that celebrated design lay a fatal weakness. If you looked at the B-17 head-on, one thing stood out. The nose, where the cockpit and the bombardier's glazing were located, was almost exposed. On the B-17E and B-17F variants, this area carried only 1 or 2 simple guns, manned by the bombardier or the co-pilot. They weren't dedicated turrets, couldn't traverse much, had a very narrow firing arc, and were hampered by limited visibility through the cockpit glazing. Yet the entire forward sector represented the 12 o'clock approach, the direct path any attacker could choose to come in on. In other words, the B-17 had a deadly blind spot straight ahead. And on the battlefield, a blind spot, no matter how small, can be a death sentence. American crews slowly realized this during the first bombing missions over Germany. At first, there were scattered reports that a few B-17s had been shot down by frontal attacks from German fighters, but the frequency rose. In large-scale raids, an increasing share of losses came from strikes delivered from the front. For the men in the cockpit, seeing a Messerschmitt Bf-109 or Focke-Wulf FW-190 come screaming in from ahead was terrifying. Closing speeds could exceed 600 miles per hour, distances shrank in an instant, and they had almost no way to stop it. The pilot or bombardier might squeeze off a few weak bursts from the nose gun, then the whole aircraft would shudder as 20mm cannon shells from the attacker tore through the cockpit glazing, engines, or fuel tanks. A bigger question emerged. Was the flying fortress really impregnable? It should be understood that the B-17 was designed around an all-around defense philosophy, but early designers focused on protection against attacks from the sides, above, and rear, the directions considered most likely. In the late 1930s, no one had envisioned widespread frontal attack tactics, since such attacks required absolute daring, great precision, and exposed the attacking pilot to mortal risk. The Americans assumed no one would foolishly fly head-on into the concentrated fire of a B-17 formation. But the Luftwaffe thought differently. While American engineers trusted the deterrent effect of defensive fire, German pilots, hardened by the relentlessness of war, were willing to try new methods. They observed, analyzed, and discovered that from the 12 o'clock approach, the B-17s were completely vulnerable. Nose fire was too weak, firing arcs too limited, and American crews lacked the time to react. From that insight, a new tactic gradually formed, a tactic that would put the flying fortress to a lethal test through 1943. The paradox was that the B-17's weakness was not technological so much as born of American hubris, an over-reliance on the idea of absolute self-defense. They believed that piling on guns everywhere would make them impenetrable. But war doesn't obey the logic of drawings on paper. A small gap in defensive coverage was enough for the enemy to exploit, turning that belief into an illusion. For the young American crews flying into German skies for the first time, the truth was brutal. They climbed aboard in faith of the flying fortress, and many never came home. Survivors recalled that when they saw waves of Bf-109s or FW-190s peel into formation and rush in head-on at terrifying speed, their hearts stopped. Voices crackled over the radio. "Bandits! 12 o'clock high!" And in seconds, the sky turned to hell. The existence of the B-17's nose weakness opened a new chapter in the air war between America and Germany. It laid the groundwork for the frontal attack tactics the Luftwaffe would adopt and ushered in many bloody battles thereafter. The flying fortress was not invulnerable. The enemy had found a way to challenge that myth. In the world of aerial combat, innovation often sprang from desperation. In 1942, as Germany faced increasingly intense bombing raids from Britain and the United States, the Luftwaffe's fighter force was compelled to find new ways to strike back. Attacks from the flanks or rear, so common in the early stages of the war, were proving less effective against the tight formations of B-17s. One German pilot lamented, "Firing from behind is like throwing stones at a fortress. The bullets go in, but they keep coming." Amid this struggle, one name stood out: Egon Meyer, a seasoned Luftwaffe fighter pilot and squadron commander on the Western Front. A veteran of countless battles from France to the skies over the English Channel, Meyer studied the B-17 formations with a careful eye. He noticed that while their defensive firepower was formidable, one area consistently appeared weak: the nose. Meyer began experimenting with a bold idea, one many of his comrades initially dismissed as madness: attacking head-on from the 12-0 position. Instead of tailing or striking from the sides, German fighters would charge straight into the formation like steel lances piercing the front. With closing speeds of more than 600 miles per hour, the distance vanished in seconds. At the decisive moment, the German pilot would unleash his 20 mm and 30 mm cannons, then break off sharply to either side to avoid collision. At first, the idea was hotly debated. Many Luftwaffe pilots argued it was suicide. Facing dozens of machine guns firing straight at them sounded like flying into a wall of fire. But Meyer persisted. He explained that from the front, very few guns could actually bear on an incoming fighter. The B-17's nose gun was weak, its field of fire narrow, while dorsal, and belly turrets could not traverse quickly enough to catch fighters charging head-on at such high speed. More importantly, from 12 o'clock, the Germans had a clear shot at the cockpit, central engines, or bomb bay, the B-17's most vulnerable points. The first trial came in late 1942. The results exceeded expectations. Within a single pass, several B-17s fell from the skies over France. Reports quickly reached higher command, and the new tactic was formalized across the Luftwaffe. It became known simply as frontal Angriff, the frontal attack. By early 1943, German squadrons were employing the tactic regularly. A familiar sight spread across the skies of Europe, a B-17 formation pressing deep into German territory, and on the horizon, white contrails appearing. Dozens of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s would form into line, preparing for the headlong rush. For the Americans, it was a nightmare. Over the radio came the urgent cry, "Bandits, 12 o'clock high." The confrontation lasted only seconds, but it was enough to unleash death. From a few hundred yards out, German pilots squeezed their triggers. 20mm HEI rounds and 30mm Mk-108 shells screamed forward, slamming into the B-17's fragile nose. Often, a single hit to the cockpit incapacitated the crew instantly. If a shell struck the bomb bay, the result could be a massive explosion, turning the flying fortress into a fireball plummeting earthward. The Americans were stunned by the tactic's effectiveness. Loss rates skyrocketed. In missions such as Regensburg and especially Schweinfurt, 1943, dozens of B-17s were shot down in a single morning. Survivors described the horror, seeing lines of German fighters diving head-on like arrows, unstoppable, and then the sky erupting with cannon fire aimed directly at the cockpit. The psychological toll was severe. The B-17, once hailed as invulnerable, now seemed to carry a death door at its nose. Each time they boarded, many crews knew their chances of survival were slim. Medical reports showed rising levels of combat fatigue among bomber crews. Many fell into fear, insomnia, and dread before each mission into Germany. For the Luftwaffe, the frontal attack became a point of pride. Commanders recognized it as the only effective method to balance the odds in the skies, as Allied numbers grew overwhelming. German pilots were drilled to coordinate in groups, attacking simultaneously to maximize effectiveness and disrupt the bomber formation. Some units even developed the crossover technique, two groups of fighters charging head-on from intersecting angles, overwhelming defenses before they could react. The Luftwaffe's early successes forced the Americans to reevaluate their entire strategy. Losses in daylight bombing climbed to alarming levels. On some days, more than 20% of the aircraft failed to return, a catastrophic rate, as any campaign exceeding 25% losses became unsustainable. Behind the scenes, U.S. generals began questioning the notion that B-17s could defend themselves without escorts. But until a solution arrived, thousands of American crews still had to fly into the inferno, facing Germany's frontal assaults. What made the tactic even more striking was its psychological edge for the Germans. Despite the risks, head-on attacks gave them the initiative. They chose the time, speed, and angle of attack. Luftwaffe pilots later recalled that charging straight at American bombers felt like a deadly game of nerves. Only a few seconds to aim, a few seconds to decide life or death. Many were killed by gunfire or collisions, yet with Vaterland, the fatherland, in their hearts, they pressed on. This new tactic turned the skies of Europe in 1943 into one of the bloodiest phases of the air war. The B-17 formations, once celebrated as untouchable fortresses, now paid in blood to uphold that belief. But war is an endless race of technology. The Americans could not sit idly by. They began searching for ways to fix this fatal weakness. And out of the bitter losses of 1943 came a breakthrough solution. A seemingly small modification, yet powerful enough to change the balance of the skies. The chin turret. In 1943, as Europe's skies blazed with bombing raids, the U.S. Army Air Forces, USAAF, had to face a painful truth. Faith in the invincible flying fortress was collapsing. Hundreds of B-17s never came back. Thousands of American pilots and gunners lay forever in the fields, forests, and bombed-out cities of Germany. Combat reports pointed to the same problem. Luftwaffe frontal attacks were devastatingly effective. Temporary fixes, such as installing a single nose gun or assigning a secondary gunner, were stopgaps, never enough to make a real difference. The Americans needed something decisive, a design change to seal the deadly gap at the front. Boeing, Lockheed Vega, and Douglas, companies producing the B-17, were tasked with an urgent mission: design a dedicated forward gun mount. But the challenge was severe. The nose compartment was cramped, packed with the navigator's station, the Norden bomb sight, and electronic gear. Any change risked interfering with the bomber's hallmark accuracy. The solution came from Bendix, a company specializing in powered turrets. They proposed the Chin turret, a compact electrically operated gun mount fitted beneath the bomber's transparent nose. Armed with twin 50-caliber Browning M2s, it could traverse both horizontally and vertically, covering the entire 12 o'clock sector. For the first time, a dedicated gunner, not the navigator or co-pilot, controlled the nose defense. Test pilots immediately recognized its value. What had once been a fatal blind spot was now a defensive stronghold, spewing streams of 50-caliber fire into any fighter daring to charge head-on. Crews who had survived harrowing missions demanded its immediate adoption. By September 1943, modified B-17Fs with chin turrets appeared over Europe. The true breakthrough came with the B-17G, entering production at year's end. The chin turret was now standard, ensuring no fortress went into Germany unshielded. The impact was immediate. For the first time, American crews felt they could meet a frontal charge on equal terms. The chin turret gunner, with wide visibility and long reach, could lock onto approaching BF-109s and FW-190s before they closed in. What had once been a fighter pilot's most reliable kill zone now became a wall of fire. A report from a late 1943 raid noted, "The enemy still tried to come in at 12 o'clock, but this time we could shoot back. I saw at least 3 fighters explode before reaching us. The rest veered away." Within months, the effectiveness of frontal attacks collapsed. In 1943, such tactics destroyed 20–30% of B-17s in some missions. By early 1944, that figure dropped below 5%. For the Luftwaffe, this was a crushing blow. What had been their deadliest tactic was now nearly suicidal. The psychological balance shifted too. American crews boarded their planes with renewed confidence, no longer haunted by the fear of being ripped open from the front. Conversely, many German pilots hesitated. Some later admitted in memoirs, "When we saw the chin turret on a B-17G, we knew the game had changed. Head-on attacks were no longer wise." But the chin turret's impact went beyond neutralizing frontal assaults. It coincided with the arrival of the P-51 Mustang, the long-range escort fighter that could stay with B-17s all the way to Berlin. Where the bombers had once been alone amid the Luftwaffe's fury, by 1944 they advanced under the protection of aggressive Mustangs. Deprived of their strongest weapon, German pilots had few options left. A small innovation, the addition of a turret, triggered a domino effect. Luftwaffe fighters reverted to side or rear attacks or tried ambushes against stragglers, but these proved far less effective. Under relentless defensive fire and P-51 dominance, their survival rates plummeted. In just 1 year, from 1943 to 1944, the air war over Europe flipped. The U.S. not only sustained, but escalated bombing, sending thousands of B-17Gs deep into the Reich. German cities, factories, and oil plants burned one after another. Once feared across Europe, the Luftwaffe was ground down to exhaustion. For American veterans, the chin turret became more than hardware. It was a shield of hope, a symbol of salvation. Many called the B-17G the redemption generation, the one that gave them a real chance of coming home. For the Germans, the chin turret symbolized something else, the death of their most innovative tactic. They had to watch as one small but well-placed improvement erased the advantage that had once terrified their enemies. And in the larger story of World War II, the chin turret stands as proof of industrial warfare's harsh rule. A single innovation, when mass-produced, can tip the balance of an entire battlefield. In early 1944, the skies over Europe witnessed an unprecedented turning point. If 1943 had been a nightmare for the U.S. Army Air Forces, the new year brought a complete reversal. The combination of the B-17G with its chin turret and the long-range P-51 Mustang escorts transformed daylight bombing, once deemed suicidal, into a storm of steel pouring down on Germany. The Luftwaffe, once the symbol of Nazi Germany's military might, now revealed deep cracks. Since 1940, it had ruled Europe's skies with the lightning-fast blitzkrieg, terrifying the continent. But just 4 years later, the balance of power had shifted decisively to the other side. The cause was not just technical innovation, but also a brutal reality. Germany could not replace losses as quickly as the U.S. Every downed Bf-109 or FW-190, every fallen veteran pilot, left a void that could not be filled. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, thousands of brand-new B-17Gs and P-51s flowed into Britain, alongside fresh crews trained in vast American flight schools. In this context, the Chin turret struck a decisive blow to Luftwaffe confidence. Throughout 1942-43, the frontal attack had been their pride, a daring tactic proving that German skill and boldness could break even the invincible flying fortress. But by late 1943, with the arrival of the B-17G, everything changed. The first missions told a grim story. German fighters charged head-on as usual, only to be met by a torrent of .50 caliber fire. Within seconds, aircraft were shredded and exploding in front of their comrades. Survivors staggered back to base shaken, realizing that the safest way in had now become the quickest way to die. Statistics painted an even darker picture. Where 10 frontal attacks once claimed 2-3 B-17s, now they brought down less than 1. German casualties soared. Veteran pilots, the Luftwaffe's irreplaceable asset, were cut down in futile attempts. German high command ordered frontal attacks restricted, forcing fighters back to older methods, slashing in from the sides, diving from above, or striking from behind. But the B-17 bristled with gun turrets covering every angle. Worse still, bomber formations grew to hundreds of aircraft, forming a collective fortress nearly impossible to penetrate. Meanwhile, in February 1944, the Americans launched Big Week, a massive bombing campaign against Germany's aircraft industry. Hundreds of B-17Gs and B-24s, shielded by P-51s, rained destruction on factories producing planes, engines, and parts. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had into defense, only to be slaughtered. Thousands of aircraft and pilots lost in mere weeks. After Big Week, the Luftwaffe never recovered. In the bigger picture, the Chin turret may have been just a small technical addition, but its strategic impact was immense. It erased the Luftwaffe's deadliest tactic and gave American crews confidence that they could survive long raids deep into Germany. One must ask, without the Chin turret, could the U.S. have sustained daylight missions all the way to Berlin? Could decisive strikes against Plosty's oil plants, rail hubs, and German industry in 1944 have succeeded? Or would the U.S. have been forced back to Britain's night bombing strategy, far less accurate and far less destructive? Thus, the Chin turret was not merely a piece of hardware, it became the foundation of an entire doctrine. Precision daylight bombing, the campaign that crippled Germany's industrial base and shortened the war. For American crews, it carried even deeper meaning. Many veterans recalled 1942-43 as a nightmare. Every mission meant dozens of comrades never returned, empty seats multiplying in the mess hall. But with the arrival of the B-17G and its Chin turret, survival rates rose, and with them, hope. One former gunner later said, "I remember the first time I saw that little turret under the nose. It wasn't much to look at, but to us, it was a promise. This time, we have a chance." For the Germans, the Chin turret left a bitter scar. Many Luftwaffe pilots later wrote of it as a milestone, the moment fate seemed to betray them. Just as they had found a way to turn the tide, the enemy had found the perfect countermeasure. That was the essence of modern industrial warfare. It was no longer about duels between a handful of aces. It was about technology, mass production, and the speed of innovation. Whoever improved faster, replaced losses faster, would win. In that race, America, with its vast industry and relentless stream of small but decisive improvements, left Nazi Germany far behind. Ultimately, the chin turret entered history as proof that sometimes the smallest details create the greatest shifts. A pair of 50 caliber guns mounted beneath a bomber's nose helped reshape the entire air war, and with it, the course of World War II. By spring 1945, as American bombs pounded Berlin and the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self, it was clear. Germany's defeat had not come from one battle, but from countless accumulated shifts. Among them, the chin turret of the B-17G stands as one of the quiet yet decisive turning points. In May 1945, the war in Europe ended. Berlin collapsed. Hitler took his own life in his bunker, and the dark wings of the Luftwaffe were broken forever. Over Europe's skies, only the vast flocks of American and British bombers roamed freely, carrying the victor's final message. Among them, the B-17G with its chin turret stood out as a symbol of resilience and adaptability in modern warfare. In retrospect, the chin turret was just a small design change. A few extra machine guns mounted beneath the nose, a compact-powered turret. Yet its meaning went far beyond mechanics. It did not just shield the fragile nose of the B-17. It shielded the faith of tens of thousands of American airmen who took off each day haunted by the question of whether they would return. When frontal attacks still reigned, every bombing run was a gamble with death. America could build more B-17s, but no factory could replace the lives of veteran crews lost in combat. The chin turret did not remove the danger entirely, but it gave crews a chance to survive, to complete their mission, to live to see the end of the war. In many veterans' memories, the image of the chin turret beneath the B-17G's nose was as iconic as its four-blade propellers or tail guns. One gunner recalled, "I fired my first burst from the chin turret at a 109 coming head-on. When I saw it burst into flames before my eyes, I realized we weren't helpless anymore. That turret saved the whole crew." For the Germans, the chin turret carried bitter memories. Luftwaffe pilots who once gloried in the frontal attack had to watch it collapse within months. They understood that war was no longer a place where a daring tactic could change the tide. It had become a contest of technology, mass production, and unending adaptation. The chin turret also embodied the American philosophy of industrial warfare. Every detail, every gun, every turret could make the difference when multiplied by the thousands. A small innovation, once mass-produced, could reshape an entire battlefield. Yet the legacy of the chin turret was not only technical or strategic. It also raised a deeper question about the nature of modern war. Do technological advances, meant to protect human lives, in fact only prolong and expand destruction? For it was precisely thanks to the chin turret and other innovations that the B-17 could continue its deep raids into Germany, contributing to the devastating destruction of Hamburg, Dresden, and Berlin. Here lay the paradox. That small turret was both a symbol of life, saving thousands of American airmen, and a tool of death, enabling the continuation of bombing campaigns with catastrophic consequences. Perhaps it is this paradox that makes the chin turret's legacy so complex. It was not merely a successful weapon, but a reminder that in war, every technical advance carries two sides: protection and destruction, saving lives and taking them. After the war, the B-17G and its chin turret became subjects of study in military academies. Engineers, pilots, and strategists looked to it for lessons in adaptability. No weapon is perfect, but every weakness can be corrected through innovation, and sometimes the smallest changes bring the widest consequences. Today, in aviation museums across the US, Britain, and even Germany, many B-17Gs are still displayed with their chin turrets intact. Visitors, standing before that curved glass dome, may struggle to imagine that it once marked the line between life and death for thousands. But for veterans who lived through it, the little turret remains sacred. The B-17G with its chin turret entered legend, not just as an aircraft, but as part of a greater story, the story of ingenuity, endurance, and the tragedy of 20th century war. Looking back, one truth is clear. War is not only decided by great battles or famous generals, but sometimes by the smallest technical changes. The Chin turret is proof of this. It was not dazzling like a decisive victory, not glamorous like a famous campaign, but silently, it helped shift the balance of power in Europe's skies. And perhaps that is what makes the Chin turret a special legacy, a small detail, but one that left an immense mark on human history.